Good morning, class. Um, I want to share with you today some information concerning the MLA guidelines. As you should know, we in language arts or um, linguistics or certain areas of discipline, the MLA guidelines for research documentation is the one that we use. Of course, there are several other documentations. There's APA, there's Chicago, there's Turabian. So there are just so many different ones. I know that for many of you, if you're taking any of the social science classes, then you do know that APA is the guidelines for that. But for English, we use MLA. And so we want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of really what that means. If we can understand when to document and the two major areas for documentation, then you can transfer that understanding to any one of the styles. And so, but I do need you to know about MLA. First of all, I want to start out by just talking to you about about the purpose for MLA. The MLA provides guidelines for documenting research in literature, in linguistics, in language, in history, philosophy, and any composition studies. And so, if you are studying or writing in any of those areas, then it would be the MLA guidelines for documentation that you would use. And there are two areas of concern when we are documenting research. Two areas, and this applies to any style that you use. But there are two, and one is the in-text citations, and the second one is a works cited list. In-text citations and works cited list. Now, let me just stop right here and say this. The works cited list would only contain um, documentation for those articles or those sources that you actually cite in your paper and that you reference in your paper. Now, I know many of you have heard of bibliographies, and a bibliography would not necessarily only contain works that you cited in your paper. It may contain other sources, other documents that you didn't actually cite in your paper, but for which you used to get some information. Maybe it led you to something else, or you did some study, but you didn't choose to cite those documents. So for works cited, though, I want you to know means that you reference those articles, those documents, those sources in your paper. So the two areas of concern are in-text citations and works cited. When we talk about in-text citations, they are used to refer the reader to the particular document that is being referenced and that is listed in the works cited list on the works cited page. So the in-text citations are used to refer readers to the particular documents that is being referenced and that is also listed in the works cited page. So when you borrow information from outside sources, and that includes information in one's paper that you from outside sources, you must acknowledge those sources. You also use those sources and as secondary sources. Secondary sources. So if you research, if you're doing research for a paper and you find an article that has something that you find important or significant for using in your paper, then you must have an in-text citation for that source. And you can, it can be a direct quote, or it can be paraphrased. But whatever the case may be, if it's a direct quote or if it's paraphrased, you must have an in-text citation for that. And those are called secondary sources. And the other source is a primary source. And the primary source is when you quote directly from or even paraphrase from your particular document that you're working with. And so this is an English class, and we are looking at writings. We're reading what authors have written. And so when you are writing about something that an author has written, say you're writing about a story that you read, some piece of literature, whether it's a short story or a poem, or whatever the case may be. For some, you read the Toni Morrison's speech, so that, and I ask you to write a little short something from that. And if you had referenced that, then that would be your primary source. And you have to cite for primary sources also. So we don't just do in-text citations for secondary sources, but we also complete in-text citations for primary sources. So in-text citations are cited through the use of parenthetical citations. So we could say in-text citation, or and the in-text citation is, let me just say, it is housed within a parenthetical citation. So parenthetical citations are as information that will lead the reader to the particular source that's on the works cited page, and that information is included in parentheses. And so thus we have the name, or we call them parenthetical citations. So in-text citations are parenthetical citations. So if you hear that language, in-text citation, parenthetical citation, they are one and the same. And so I want you to be aware of that. Now, the parenthetical citation for MLA will come if you have a direct quote, say, and you need to give the parenthetical citation for that quote. Then it has to be in parentheses, and it should come before the ending punctuation for that reference, whether it's a direct quote or a paraphrase. The parenthetical citation comes before the punctuation. And the primary information that you would need in your parenthetical citation is the author's last name and the page number. So say you were referencing a text that I wrote, and so you would, in your parenthetical citation, you would have open parentheses, Reese, which is my last name, space, and then you would put the page number. So say it's page number 10, and then closing parentheses, and then the ending punctuation, period. So that's what you're going to primarily have. The basic entry in a parenthetical citation is the last name and the page number. Please note that for MLA, we do not put a P before the page number. It is simply the last name, space, and then the number of the page. The specific page from which you obtained your information or your reference. The specific page that you are referencing, okay? Now, there's an exception to the last name. If you include the last name in your sentence, in the body of your paper, so if you said something like Reese in her article on whatever, then when you do your parenthetical citation, you would not put Reese again. You would simply put the page number. So if you introduce the author's name in the sentence, then you only supply the page number in the parentheses. Um, the other thing that you want to remember is, well, let me go back and let me just say, either way you choose to do this in your paper, whether you leaving out the author's name in your sentencing, then you know that in your parenthetical citation, you have to put the last name and the page number. But if you put the author's name, if you supply the author's name in your paper, in the body of your paper, then your parenthetical citation will only have the page number. Now, let me say this. If you have, if you say you quote an author, just use me as an example, and say you quote me and you say whatever you have to say, and then in your parenthetical citation you say Reese space page 10, okay? And then you go ahead on and you write, and then you come back to something else that you want to reference that I said in that article, then you would not need to put my name again. You would only need to put the page number. Okay, let me say that again. If you are referencing an author in your paper, the initial reference to that author should be the author's name and the page number in the parenthetical citation, unless you mention the author's name in the body of your paper, in the text. Now, if you go back to that author, then you would need to not put the name of the author, but the page that you're referencing at that time in the parenthetical citation. Now, the exception to that is if between the initial mentioning of the author and the second mentioning of the author, you reference another author, then in the second reference to the first author that you mentioned, you would need to put the name again so that the reader would know that you're going back to Reese and you're coming back to it. Okay, so you said you quoted Reese in the first one. So in your parenthetical citation, you have Reese space 10. Then you write, and then you use a reference for an author named Bell. So then, of course, you would need to cite that also. So in your parenthetical citation, you would put Bell space page number. Then you want to go back, you write some more, and then you want to go back to Reese. Now you're going to need to put Reese again in the parenthetical citation. You need to put Reese and the page number, because otherwise the reader will think that this references to Bell, and so you have to switch it up. But if you, in your first citing, you say Reese, page number, and then you go later and you have something else for Reese with no other secondary source mentioned, then you just put the page number. And hopefully I didn't confuse you with that explanation, but it's important that you know that, okay? So that you know every time you reference that author, if there's no other author referenced, then you just need, after the initial in-text citation, you would just need to put the page number. Every time you reference that author and that text, okay? So that is a really important thing for us to know and to remember. Okay, when you are, so I'm going to move on now to when you're having, when you're dealing with page numbers that are in a range, so that perhaps you are referencing, you paraphrase something you read in a whole chapter of a text. So, say you read from page 32 to page 42, then in your parenthetical citation, you would have the author's name, if you didn't mention it in the body of your text, and you would have uh, 32 hyphen 42. There's no spacing between that. So it's the author's name, space, 32 hyphen 42. But if the page numbers have the same hundreds or thousand digit, do not repeat it when you're listing the document in the final page range. So for instance, if you had a referenced an article or something, and you referenced a whole chapter, and the whole chapter was from page 234 to 242. In your parenthetical citation, you would have the author's name, last name, if you didn't mention it in the body of your text, and space, and then you would say 232 hyphen 42, which is, in fact, 232 through 242. So you don't have to mention the 200 again. If you have, say, something you're referencing in the thousands page, the page numbers in the thousands. So you have 1,350 hyphen 55, which is to say that you're referencing page 1,350 through page 1,355. But if it shifts thousands or hundreds, then you have to write the whole thing out. For example, if you are referencing if from a document pages 290 to 301, then you could not say 290-01. You would need to say 290-301 because the hundreds changed. And the same thing if it was 1,395, you would not just say 1,395 hyphen 32, or then you would say 1,395 hyphen 1,432, because again that hundreds changed. Now, and I hope you understand that, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask questions and send me your questions. I will be more than happy to answer. Now, if you refer to an entire work, like a whole article or a whole entire book, then or a one-page work, then you don't need to put the page number. The page number is not necessary because you're referencing the entire book. Of course, you know that's probably going to be something you're paraphrasing and not direct quoting, because you're not going to direct quote a whole article or a whole book or even a whole page. All right? So this is in-text citation. In-text citation is presented in parentheses, therefore we refer to it as parenthetical citations. Okay? And the basic entry for a parenthetical citation is the author's last name and the page number that this particular reference is coming from. Okay? All right, so hopefully you get that. Now let's talk about the works cited page. The entries on the works cited page should match the parenthetical citations in your paper. In other words, if you have an entry on the works cited page, there should be a corresponding in-text citation, a parenthetical citation. And it's just, the same vice versa. If you have a parenthetical citation, then you should have a document listed on your works cited page to match that. That's what it's all about, okay? Because you want the reader to be able to go and find the exact text or document that you are referencing in your paper. They should be able to go and look that up and read what your eyes read. Okay, so the works cited page is a page, it starts on a page all by itself. In other words, if you have typed up your paper and on the last page of your paper, you only have 4 lines or one little short paragraph, you do not start the works cited page right beneath that. You go to a whole new page, and the works cited page has a heading, a title, and the title is Works Cited. Works Cited is the title of the works cited page. The title is centered on the page. And of course, it's an inch down from the top margin, but we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But the works cited page is a separate page. The title of that page is Works Cited, and it is centered on the page. The items in the works cited that are listed on the works cited page are in alphabetical order by the author's last names. Items listed on a works cited page are in alphabetical order by the author's last name. We do not number them. We do not put a letter beside them. They are entered based on the author's last name and in alphabetical order. So you wouldn't say 1 and then 2. You would not do that, okay? So please remember that. That does not follow MLA guidelines to number the items in the works cited page. So you would arrange them in alphabetical order. If the source has more than one author, then you're going to alphabetize the entry according to the last name of the first author. The first author. And you see the first author on the text is going to be listed first. So that's what we mean by the first author. What author is listed first? If you have more than one author, what name is listed first as the author? That's usually the primary author. And so that primary author's name is listed first. So you wouldn't go in and alphabetize the author's name and take that one. You want the first author that's given for that text. Okay? So if you use more than one work by the same author, then you alphabetize the works by the first major word in each title. So you have this article that Reese has written, okay? So, but you are using more than one article by Reese, so you do have to indicate that. And so you would alphabetize that not just by the last name of the author, okay, because it should be in alphabetical order by the last name. But when you're dealing with 2 articles from the same author, then you want to further alphabetize it based on the first major word in the title. So if I wrote an article, say the article is making things right, and you reference that article, but I also have an article that you reference called All About the Times. So then you would list the article entitled All About the Times first, and then the second article by Reese would be Making Things Right. Okay? And remember that they're not alphabetized by when they were used first in your text. Okay? It's last name, and if it's more than one article by that same author, then it's first major word. And the and a, those are not major words, okay? So also, say you do have two articles that you reference by the same author. So the first entry, you would put the author's name, the last name, and the way it should be entered. But the next item, you would not put the author's last name. You would put 3 hyphens for the author's name. 3 hyphens for the author's name. So take the example I just gave. So you have 2 articles that you're referencing for Reese. And so Reese is the last name. I'm just using that as an example. So you already have alphabetized it by the first major word in the title. So Reese, and then the first article is almost, whatever I said, I can't remember, almost done. And then the second one, you would not put Reese. You would put the 3 hyphens, and then you would put making things right. Okay, that article. And that's if you have 2 or 3 or more by the same author that you're referencing. That is how it's done. Okay? That's, if you have a work that there is no author, then of course you're going to alphabetize it according to the first important word in the title. It's alphabetized based on the first important word in the title. And the other thing about the way the entries are placed in the works cited, on the works cited page. The first line of every entry is flush against the left margin. The first line of every entry is flush against the left margin. And any subsequent lines are indented 5 inches, which is 1 tab. Okay, so it's like for paragraphs, we indent the first line 5 inches, right? And then every subsequent line is against the left margin. Well, for the works cited entries, it's just the opposite. The first line for works cited is against the left margin, and any subsequent lines are indented 5 inches or 1 tab. It's better to tab than to space over because the pagination can get off when you do that. So sometimes you may find it difficult if you have subsequent lines for your works cited page to get that indentation for the subsequent lines. So what I always suggest that my students do is at the end of that first line, hit a hard return. In other words, you hit enter. And then it's going to take you to the next line. And what you do then is you hit that tab key and all the subsequent lines will be tabbed over. Okay? So just practice it and see how you can work that out. Okay, so that is some general information about MLA that I want you to know. I also have placed in your course content a PowerPoint presentation that discusses all of what I have discussed with you right now, today, in this video. So you can go and study. You can use that PowerPoint presentation as a study guide, and you can use this video as a study guide also. Now, what I want to talk about now is still MLA, but I want to talk about how you format your paper, how the paper is formatted. The first thing you should do when you are getting ready to type any paper, this you should do before you type any line of your paper. Set your margins at 1 inch all the way around. MLA Guidelines requires that every paper has 1 inch margins. That's all the way around, top, bottom, left, right. The margin is 1 inch. The next thing you should do is set your paper to double space. You set it to double space before you type a line. Just set your paper to double space. And once you do that, you never ever have to double space again. You don't have to hit the enter key twice to double space because the entire paper should be double spaced. Okay, it's from the heading all the way through works cited. It's double spaced, but you don't have to worry about that if you set your paper from the very beginning to double space. And then the other thing that you want to do is you want to insert a header into your paper. And this header should contain your last name, space, and a page number. So you set that header with your last name and space, and it will automatically paginate. If you set the right one, it'll automatically paginate so that on page 1, it'll be your last name, space, 1, page 2, you never have to go back in and fix it again. You don't have to do anything with it. Once you set it at the beginning, so page 2 would be your last name, and then it'll be 2. And then page 3 would be your last name, and then space 3. Okay? Once you set it. So these are the important things you need to do up front. Set your margins at 1 inch all the way around. Set your processor, your document, to double space, and that's for the entire document. And then set your header. This is before you get started. Now, it's important to know that there's a difference between the header and the heading. The header is just your last name and a page number. So once you get that done, now you're ready to put in your heading. Your heading is flush against the left margin. Class, do not put your heading in a header. If you put your heading in a header, then it will show up on every page of your document. And it's only to be presented on the first page of your document. The header is supposed to show up on every page, but the heading is only to be available on the first page of your paper. And it consists of the first line of your heading is your name. The second line of your heading is your instructor's name. The third line of your heading is your class name and number. And please include in that your section number, because an instructor may have that same course but in several sections. They need to know what class it is. And then the fourth line of your heading is the date. And the date is presented in European style, such that you would have the day of the month, space, the month spelled out, space, the year. So today is January 29th. And so your date would look like this: 29 space January space 2020. So your heading let me go through it again. There are 4 items in your heading. Your name, first line. Second line is your instructor's name. Third line is your course name, number, and section. And the fourth line is the date in European style. Okay? And this is on every paper. You should never turn in a paper with no heading. Never. And the heading should look like this, what I just explained, for any document that requires MLA guidelines. Okay. All right, so let me see if there's anything else. Okay, you want to use, their font size should be 12 points. So you need to set that up ahead of time too. Excuse me for not mentioning that. So you want to set up your margins, your double spacing, your font size should be 12. And most of the time we like Times Roman as the font type. Okay? No fancy, you don't want to use fancy fonts for your papers that you turn in, or for any research paper, any important document. You don't want to use fancy fonts for that. So Times Roman is a good one, and it should be a 12-point font size. And then you want your header. Okay, all of that you do before you type anything. All right, paragraphs should be indented. So when you indent your first paragraph, when you hit that tab key for the indentation of your first paragraph, please hit the tab key. Don't space over 5 spaces. Don't go over 15 inches into the middle of the paragraph. Just 5 inches, which is 1 tab. And once you do that at the beginning of your paper, the first paragraph, then every time you hit your enter key, it's going to automatically indent for the paragraphs. Paragraphs should be indented. Okay. The other thing I need to tell you is that you should always have a title. So directly following your heading, you should have a title that's centered on the page. Directly following your heading, there should be a title that's centered on the page. And that title should not be underlined. It should not be in italics. It should not be in quotation marks. It should reflect the main idea of what it is you're writing about. So the main idea of your thesis. If you're only writing a paragraph, the main idea of the paragraph. But it should be centered, and it should come right after the heading. Now, let me say this. If you are writing about a particular text, then you cannot use that text as your title. And your title should not be Essay 1 or, whatever the writing prompt is. That should not be your title. The title should be your main idea, what you want to say concerning the writing prompt. You can't use somebody's title that belongs to them. So if you were writing a paper discussing something about, say, Langston Hughes's Harlem, the title of your paper could not be Harlem. It wouldn't even be Harlem by Langston Hughes. That's his title. He wrote that. But if you talked about the use of similes in Langston Hughes's Harlem, now you can use it, because you have said that you're going to be looking at similes, and you have given the text that you're looking at it from. And that Harlem would be in italics, or it would be in quotation marks. Okay, so that, but if you just said Harlem or Harlem by Langston Hughes, that's not a good title. So be very, very careful of that. When you read Sunny Blues, and some of my classes, we will be reading that. And you don't want to say um, Sunny's Blues. That title belongs to James Baldwin's text, not to you. But if you wanted to say that your title is The Use of Music to Bring Meaning in Sonny's Blues, or in James Baldwin's Sonny's Blues, then that'll be okay. But just Sonny's Blues would not be good. I hope I brought that home really good. Okay. So hopefully this video is helpful to you, and that you will view it. And if you have any questions, any concerns, that you will contact me. We will soon have, for my online courses, we will soon have a a, uh, a chat session. Uh, and office hours will be set up so that you can come on and talk to me. In fact, I'm going to set that up today. So I look forward to speaking with you, to you being able to come in on the chat sessions, and look for some more videos on what we are discussing and talking about in class. All right, have a great day.